explain a little bit of stuff around crying and why it sometimes it seems like we cannot stop to cry, or why there's so much crying. And think of it like this: the body and the psychoenergetic body is like a garbage container, and this garbage container hasn't been taken out, or it's like an uncleaned apartment, and this apartment hasn't been cleaned for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of incarnations, and it hasn't been cleansed. And now suddenly, because you're taking over the energy from your ancestors, you're taking over the energy from your parents, from your grandparents. I give you an example. My ex-girlfriend, one of my ex-girlfriends, she felt always disgust when anything was sexual in her life. And she asked if we can do a session. I said, yeah, sure, let's do a session. And in the session, we did like a tantra session. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm also a tantra master for women. And in the session, it came out that she saw a vision of her grandmother being raped, and she was pretty sure it was real. So she said, "What should I do with it?" And I said, ask your grandmother if she's still alive. Ask your grandmother." And she didn't have the guts to ask her grandmother, but she asked her mother, and the mother confirmed that the grandmother was raped. So for anybody who's not a believer in these kind of things, understand that the energies in your previous in grandmothers and previous ancestors, that they're also stored within you. This is important to know. So the energies that your parents had in them, that the grandparents had in them, you are also carrying. So what you end up is in a kind of emotional prison, and this emotional prison hinders you to do things, so you don't want to experience the same things that happened in the past. So get this. So you're actually avoiding certain things that have happened to your parents or grandparents or great grandparents and so forth, maybe even in another lifetime. And this is totally bizarre because your life is basically limited to the trauma your past experienced. It's absolutely insane if you think about it that way, but this is what it is. So, in a sense, my ex girlfriend picked me because she needed to be healed from that trauma. It's it's absolutely crazy if you start to understand these transgenerational traumas. So, okay, so let's say you have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years of trauma in your body because you haven't been awakened and you haven't done any trauma work in your past. Then suddenly you experience maybe a spiritual awakening, and that's you start crying. And sometimes the crying comes even before the spiritual awakening because you're already being primed by the universe for that. And here comes something, another super interesting thing, that for the first time, we are the first generation, because of this open information and people being able to watch other people, who are kind of like gurus in the sense they bring light to darkness. Then suddenly, like for me was Mooji, then suddenly you are being catapulted into kind of like a cleansing room, like a spiritual soul cleansing room, because spiritual awakening is nothing else than a soul spiritual cleansing room. So, and suddenly you have all this dirt on you. And I have a fantastic analogy, I visited Ganga Mira, who's the widow of Papaji. I visited her in Portugal, in the Algarve. I think it's near Algesur. And I visited two satsangs, and there was a girl in front who was speaking, and she was crying like crazy. And she said, "Why can't I get it? Why can't I get it? Why can't I spiritually waken up?" And Ganga Mira, who I don't consider her very like a special non-duality teacher or something, but she teaches non-duality, certainly not like Papaji. And but she got kind of impatient with her, and she was like, "Yeah, well, who is it that is crying, or who is it that is in pain? Who is it that has that story?" And the girl just, it wasn't she wasn't ripe for that, and she just started crying again, and then she went to the car, and I saw when she left with the car, I stopped her and I said, "Hey, I have an analogy for you that might help you." She was totally perplexed, like, why am I talking to her? Like, and I said, it's a little bit like you are a stone in the river, okay? And maybe even something softer than a stone. You're like a stone in the river, and the river is consciousness, is awareness. That's what you are. But the stone is still in the river. And the friction between the flowing stone, because if you're super conscious, there's a lot of friction. So the friction between the flowing stone and the stone is kind of like the crying, in the sense like God, if you want to say God or the universe or that consciousness, is forming the body by reducing the material, surface material of the stone. So it's kind of like forming the stone. And crying is basically that you've been so much not yourself in hundreds and thousands of years, you could say, that now this pure consciousness which is flowing is forming the body and everything, the psychoenergetic field, into its form, you could say, in which it and it's removing debris, debris, like basura, garbage. It's removing the garbage. So crying is actually the removing of garbage in the psychoenergetic field through awareness. That means the more you become aware, the more you rest in silence, the stronger the river flows, you could say, the more you're going to cry. If the form that you have held is very much not what it's kind of like supposed to be, maybe, if you want to say it. And that is why you're crying a lot, and that is why the crying sometimes doesn't stop, because you've neglected yourself so much in a spiritual, in a soul sense, that now you being cleansed by this river of endless consciousness, you could say. And this is the best analogy for people to understand why they can't stop crying. Sometimes, like I said, also, or even before spiritual awakening. And if you understand the body very well, this psychoenergetic field is almost like a garbage collector. The more people you're in touch with, the more impressions you get through movies, through readings, through television, through people, contact with people, touching people, any kind of information that you are accessing. And the strongest information, of course, is intimate contact with someone in whichever form, or trauma from, violence, all of this stuff that gets stored in the psychoenergetic field. And this psychoenergetic field is, from some people can read it. They can, like, literally read it. They have so high sensitivity, they can read your psychoenergetic field and see your past trauma. My ex-girlfriend, for example, Antje, she had that ability. She would touch you and she would see your traumatic past. It's absolutely insane. And I know that it works because she did it with my mother, and I was like, whoa. So some people have, these abilities, and I have the ability to feel chakras and blockages in the body, but I cannot see your past. And so people do have different abilities, and that all that stuff gets stored in the body. And unless someone shows you access to it, or you yourself find access to it, you're actually carrying that garbage with you around. The best picture you should have about this is, like a garbage lady. Imagine that you have, 10 sacks of really smelly, ugly garbage in your auric field. And you're carrying that around all the time, and people can sense it. You can sense it, that there's something that you're carrying. That's why spiritual awakening is also important, as a cleansing kind of ritual, and you're purposefully starting to let go. And I have an affirmation that works absolutely fantastic, is once you're marinating as the self, as beingness, completely empty, you can either just be in that emptiness like vipassana, or say to yourself one affirmation. You don't even need to repeat it a lot. Say one affirmation and say, I now release all old sadness and trauma from the body. And then continue sitting in silence. And you will be amazed. Once you're really ready for it, you will be amazed how much garbage collection happens. And but remember, you are not that. It's not like just because it's surfacing, just because there is something, it doesn't mean you should identify with it. It just means that just like you would have a massage, or you would go into the sauna, or you would go for a walk, allow yourself some goodness for your body. You don't have to be like these religious people that are purposefully hurting their back or something like that. You don't need to be like, go like this through life, because because choosing that which is harmoniously beneficial to you, or which is harmonious to you, is actually self-love. A lot of people don't understand self-love. Self-love is the allowing yourself harmonious things which you enjoy, which are good for you, which give you more harmony rather than disharmony. That's self-love. And so let's go back to crying for people who really want to understand what it is. So allow the crying, allow as much crying as needed, even if it takes month and month and month and month and month and many months. Just cry, 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 let it all out. Just make sure you drink enough, you get the minerals and all of this stuff. Maybe take a multivitamin just to be sure to get all the minerals, but keep crying. Keep crying, 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 crying. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Al reverso, to the contrary, you are releasing tons of old shit. And sometimes also it is about, as you recognize the real self, you become aware of what you've held on to, the garbage bags, and that makes you also kind of sad. It's like living in a really messy apartment, but not being aware that you're in a really messy apartment. You think things are normal, and then suddenly someone turns the lights on, and you're like, oh my fucking God. And I've been living in this all the time. And consciousness goes like, yes. And then you're like, okay, let's get rid of that. And that also leads people to cry because they realize with how much garbage they've been living. So, and this is a lot of very successful people, by the way, never had this kind of cleansing session. And they become successful because that trauma has never been released. And their success is actually a coping mechanism to that trauma. It's their emotional prison. So that's why some very, very successful and very rich people are actually very sad people, because it's actually their success is a trauma response. Even Steve Jobs was like that. Michael Jackson was like that. A lot of artists are like that. That are very successful. They're actually their success is a trauma response, because they hide their emotions. That's their emotional prison. And the only thing is that they have kind of become lucky. It's not luck, but it's kind of lucky in the sense that their trauma response is actually success, rather than making yourself small and hiding in the corner. Because it just made them survive a little bit better. But the trauma, nonetheless, is exactly the same, and it's still uh it hinders their true happiness completely. So unless they face it, they will never be truly happy. And someone who recognizes it at least partially, I'm not saying fully, but someone who recognized it at least a little bit partially was Jim Carrey. but it wasn't enough. It's not enough. When I look at him, I see he's still a garbage collector. So learning to stop carrying the garbage around and crying is an absolute essential component of letting that garbage go. So because people were talking about crying in some of my videos in the comments, I was like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what it is. So when in the psychoenergetic field, a trauma gets opened, it's like I experience it as in like an energy cloud. It's like a dense energy cloud. If the denser the cloud, the more sucio, the more dirty your apartment, the more you are basically it's creating havoc. So you can get huge disease also from collecting this garbage with you if it's really toxic, if it's like radioactive. And once you act once you activate once you connect with that frequency of that trauma, the energy cloud starts to open up and it starts to rise over the nadis direction eyes. And a lot of people have fear of that, but if you start to awaken, you're not fearful of it anymore. And then you're able to cry out that energy cloud that is not as dense anymore. So you could say almost if it's dense, it's stuck in the body in the psychoenergetic field and creating havoc in your body. And once it opens up, it becomes lighter and starts to surface. That's how it really works. So I literally can feel this in me and patients that I work with. So then this kind of rises, and then you can cry it out. And spiritual awakening makes you release, especially those that you've just held down with energetic energy, those clouds, those dense clouds. You start to open them up just by being in the present moment. And by the way, Eckhart Tolle, in one of his teachings, he said the same thing. He said, when you feel something is not right in your body, that's where I said, when you feel something dense, then you keep your attention, your awareness there, and eventually that opens up. He didn't really explain how. I can explain exactly how that happens because every trauma has an energy frequency, an energy signature, you could say. And your active mind, your active consciousness, which is up here, which if it's constantly there and you're thinking, you're not really on that frequency. You're not connecting with that frequency. And that's also why people cry in therapy sessions because they're actually connecting with a previous frequency of that trauma. And that's how it's almost like a quantum entanglement. If you're on the same frequency as something else, you can actually allow it for it to be released. It's like it's the same as if you're in a very dirty apartment, but you're watching out of the window, okay? As you watch out of the window, you're not aware of what's going on in the apartment. You might have like a smell or something, but you don't really know what's going on. Only if you change your view to direction of the garbage, you start to see the garbage, right? So it's like the same like you're in a normal apartment, you're going by the kitchen and you don't notice that the garbage is full, and then one day you're like, oh my god, I have to take the garbage out. So this is the same thing here, that by changing your view on a different frequency, on a different vibrational level in your body, you start to see the dirt that's been in your psychoenergetic field, and thereby uh kind of intuitively um the the attention, the light, the higher vibration that you are, the awareness is the highest therapist. Awareness is the highest, and you put the awareness there, then it's kind of like you're shining into darkness with a light, and thereby almost like surprised, you know uh uh like you caught, a monster in the corner. It starts to kind of like start to move, And as it moves, because you're putting awareness there, it starts to become bigger, lighten, and that's how it surfaces, and that's how you cry it out. At one point in spiritual awakening, you can be even like a professional garbage collector. You can just look at your psychoenergetic field and be like, now all of the old stuff, all of the sadness, all of the trauma can come out. Speak in the present form. Don't make it complicated. Don't make a negative negation, or what is it called? But just say like affirmative. Say all of the garbage can come out now. All of the sadness can come out, and sit in silence, and you will be amazed. And you can, be aware of the whole psychoenergetic field. And never assume that it's an unending story, even if it takes month and month and month and month and month. It's just that a lot of old shit is being released, and every time do the self inquiry. Be sure that be make sure that you see that that you're not the sadness that is being cried out. And then you will over time you feel much lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter.